Warner, I've made you a presenter. I've given up. I got disconnected from the webinar. Go ahead. There, you're unmuted too.
Good. Alright, so let's get started then. Let's forget about the tech glitches. Hopefully mine is not going to act up or anything. Regardless, it's good to have everybody here today. I have presented this before, and I had a great time with the feedback that I got from the Slashes at SQL Saturday. So yeah, when Sharon came up and said we should do this for the DBA virtual chapter, it was jumped on the opportunity. I try to clean up some of the stuff. I added some info on the demo. So anyway, hopefully you guys will like it. This is mostly a demo presentation. I will take very little time on actual PowerPoint slides, and then we'll just dive into my VM and go through the actual hands-on stuff. Okay, cool. So let's get started. Very quick about me. I've been a SQL Server DBA for about 9 years, almost 10 at this point. I was previously a level 3 DBA at HP for their ITO outsourcing branch, so basically big companies that outsource their entire IT department to HP. So I was a DBA there in the database tower. I'm now a principal consultant at Pythian. Pythian is a provider of managed services for database administration. So if you want to augment your team, if you want to just do consulting, if you have a DBA that needs some help with overnight stuff and weekends work and all that stuff, then we can help out. I'm also SQL Server MCM. You guys can reach me there on Twitter or and my email there, warnerchavez@gmail.com. Just don't sign me up for anything weird. So the story for today. So what is my number one goal for today and for this material that I created? Is basically to provide a non-intimidating 100% practical intro to extended events. And the main motivation for it is that when I started to work with X events around 2008 or 2, a lot of people were really intimidated by the fact that it was all just command line, well not command line, but all T-SQL, and the actual reading of the results was all XML processing. So that got dramatically improved with 2012 and now 2014. And there's still some kind of I feel there's some kind of mindset still that a lot of people still stay with a profiler and the classic traces just because extended events has been presented to them as this like really obscure kind of in-depth feature, whereas where I'm coming from is to just show you guys some really practical uses for it to just get your feet in the water, and then you guys will you can go on your own and jump completely into the pool. Why do we care about it? Well, Xevents is tracing infrastructure, so for us database professionals, it basically let us know what's going on inside SQL Server and gives us some really cool details about it. It's the heir to Profiler. So Profiler, if you guys think about it, it's not really getting much or any updates, and plus the events that get added to Profiler is not really growing at this point, whereas extended events on each release, they're adding like tons of more events. It's SQL 2008 Plus. It's all editions too, which is really nice. You don't have to worry about an enterprise edition. It's not a pay-to-play kind of feature, so it's on everything, and it's continuously expanded. So like I said, it's really the tracing way to go at this point. The SQL Server team is mostly focusing on every new release, adding more events and more stuff that we can trace for extended events. Okay. So what's extended about it? So first of all, performance. It's a lighter weight, and it allows us really fine-grained control over what we want to trace. So it also has asynchronous targets. So the whole goal is that really performance is not impacted by our traces. It's flexible, more flexible than Profiler, as we'll see on the demos. One of the biggest things is that you can have filtering, for example, on an event level, whereas if you guys remember about Profiler, you have to have filters on the entire session, right? Extensibility, so like I said, on any new release, it's getting more events added, and just in general, the depth of what we can trace on Profiler, which is we're going to go through in the demos as well. It's really cool. Okay. So the main difference is full DDL support. So any of you guys that are SQL Server DBAs and have been there DBAs for a while, usually this is what we do, right? We will go into Profiler, we pick the events that we want, and then when we want to run it on the server side, we go to that export feature that gives us all the T-SQL code to create it on the server side. And when you see that, you have like no clue what it is actually doing, right? Profiler scripts are just a bunch of numbers that by themselves don't seem to have any meaning. Like I always joke around with my colleagues that nobody ever shares Profiler scripts because it's just all those number codes. You have no clue what the hell that people are giving you, right? Whereas as we'll see on the demos, extended events has full DDL support, where somebody was like, oh, I have a cool script for extended events that actually traces exactly what you're looking for. You could actually just read it and understand what it's doing, which is something that I cannot say about Profiler scripts. Filters at the event level, just something that I mentioned already. There's different retention modes, and this is a big thing for performance. So we can say that we don't want to lose not even one event, which is the biggest performance penalty. We can say that we don't care about how many events we lose, which would be the lightest performance penalty. And we can also say that we just care about losing one event, which makes a big difference for the internal tracking engine, the fact that it can just drop an event every now and then. The targets as well, they could be synchronous or asynchronous. And again, it's a difference between performance that you can get when a target is asynchronous. It'll just fill up a memory buffer, and once that buffer is filled up, then it will flush to whatever permanent target you have it running on. Very powerful, again, for let's say if you're doing some server-side tracing and you think it might be a little bit heavier, then you can just use asynchronous, make a bigger memory buffer, and decrease the actual impact on the server. And last but not least, something that's very cool, and we're going to go through on my second demo, is causality tracking. And this is off by default because it's off is lighter in performance than on. But what it allows us to do is that it basically gives each request a fingerprint, and this fingerprint carries on from events to events, so that you can actually have an end-to-end sequence of events for any given session completely ordered by the engine, which is really cool. And we'll go through in the demo about how quickly you can just drill down to exactly what you're looking for. Okay, so and this is the last slide before we jump into the demos, which is the the interesting part of the presentation. So the basic workflow to keep in mind is, remember, events are grouped into packages. With the GUI, you don't really need to be that much aware of it because the GUI has this pretty nifty search. So you can just say, if I'm interested in the transaction log, I'm wondering what kind of events do I have. You can just search for log on the GUI, and you guys will see that later on the demo. You create so you basically pick the events that you want. You create a session inside SQL Server that tracks those events, respecting whatever filters you guys set up. Then you pick a target. A target will receive the events from SQL Server, and then you guys can process them. And then we just process the results. In the previous versions, it was all scripting plus XML. The scripting side, it's the DDL makes a lot of sense. It's pretty easy to understand and write. But I'm not a big fan of XQuery, so really, to me, once they implemented the reading the results of Management Studio, that was a big game changer. I started using it a lot more. Like before, in the previous versions, I would only use extended events if I really had a problem that can only be solved with extended events. But now that 2012 and up, the GUI supports reading the results, I jump into extended events all the time. So hopefully you guys will be excited about some of the stuff we see today, and then you'll start adopting my mentality as well. Okay, so let's do a demo really quick about response time analysis. So I'm going to jump into my VM. Okay, so this is the Windows Server 2012, and I'm running right now a SQL Server, if you guys see over here, it's SQL Server 12.0.2000. That's actually RTM for 2014. And we're going to do some response time analysis with extended events. So if you guys remember what response time analysis is, so response time analysis says a request equals service time plus the waiting time, right? So that's where everything comes with, you know, how many, most of us, if we're DBAs, we're pretty familiar with SQL Server's wait stats, right? And there's many third-party products, including some of Dell's, that, you know, will give you a profile of the waits on the server, and there's some DMVs that we have, for example, like sysdmos waiting tasks that will give us what tasks are waiting on and continuously get updated. So what's really cool about extended events for this type of analysis is that it lets us focus on one particular session. So it's something that we couldn't do in Profiler. And it's harder to do with the other SQL Server tools. For example, without extended events, if you were interested in a particular session and you wanted to see all the ways that it went through, you would have to be like constantly calling sys.dmos waiting tasks just to see every time that the wait type changes. You would need to store it somewhere else over and over and over and over. And it could be that, you know, imagine something, any trivial SQL Server call goes through a large amount of waits that are not even significant, right? And you would need to be able to pretty much just count every single one of them. It becomes a really non-trivial problem. Now with extended events, it's a lot easier to do. So what I'm going to do is I have this store procedure that I call salary analysis. I have this database I created called HR, which is just for the purpose of today's demos. I'll show you guys real quick here what it looks like. So very simple. It has a list of employees. It has their salary, the hours that they tracked, and the days that they've worked. And that's it. And we have this salary analysis store procedure, and it basically goes in and checks everybody's salaries. It does some adjustments over and over and over, and we'll use it as an example of something that I would be interested in optimizing. Obviously, you guys would do it on a real tuning exercise on one of your test machines, you know, maybe a particular query that's becoming an issue, maybe a store procedure that you guys want to improve, and you would run it an analysis similar to what I'm going to do here, okay? So first of all, we have the session that I'm going to be running on, and I just need to note the actual number of my SPID, so I can get it really easy off of Management Studio right here. So you guys can see it's 68. And then we can just dive into the extended events GUI. So extended events, you'll find it under the management folder. There's an extended events node, and then there's the sessions. Actually interesting is 2012 started with an always on session as well. From 2008 plus, there's a system health session. It was really augmented in 2012. There's a lot of really cool stuff on the system health session. So for those of you that have never even thought about extended events that are here today, really cool thing that you can actually check. Go and see what is contained in your default system health session. You might be surprised about some of the cool stuff that is being tracked already by default anyway. Okay. So let's jump and just create a new session. And we'll go through each one of these screens for this example and the different options that we get through them. So obviously, first thing, I just need to provide a name. So I'm just going to call it RTA analysis. I'm not going to use a template because we're going to do this, step each one. So do we want to start the event session at server startup? I'm not going to click this now because we're just doing it for the demo. Start the event session immediately after session creation. That's fine. There's an option to watch live data on the screen as it is captured. I'm not going to use it because basically I'm just going to take the results file and open it in Management Studio. I'm not interested in seeing it live. And here's the causality tracking option. You guys see what says track how events are related to one another. We are going to use this for the second demo. I'm not going to use it now because now we're just tracking the different weight types, so I'm not interested in tracking causality for them. Plus, I'm only tracking one session, so obviously everything's just going to belong to one session anyway. Okay. So this is the search screen that I was mentioning. You can actually search here on all the different events. You don't have to necessarily know about where they stored and what package or anything like that. Just you type and you go. So in this case, we're interested about weights. So I would just go in, type in weight, and that's it. And it gives us all the different weight events that exist on SQL Server. You can actually click on it, and it will tell you what type of event fields you get on them. If you go here, you can actually you'll see all the columns that will be captured within this event, and if there's any description from the developers of SQL Server, you will get it right here at the bottom. And in this case, what I'm interested in is in these two weights here. So if we'll go over and see what this says, so it says weight info occurs when there's this weight on a SQL OS control resource. Use this event to track resource weights that occur during task execution. And then the other one, weight info external, occurs when a SQL OS task switches to preemptive mode to execute potentially long-running operationals, which usually means we're doing something like maybe running like an extended store procedure or something that gives the control back to the operating system, right? In any case, so for our session today, I'm just interested in these two guys. So just click them, just pretty much add them, and that's it. Once you have them here, there's an advanced config per event that you can do, and that's where we're going to add our filters. So I'm just going to go configure here. And the only filter that we want for this particular trace is that we want both events to just track my particular session. If you guys remember, the session ID was 68. So let me go back a little bit here. Let's go over each one of these tabs. So for any event or for all events, you can pick two main things. So either actions or the predicates. And actions are basically what it says here, global fields. So what it means, those are fields that SQL Server can expose to the event, but they're not there by default. So you can add them if you want, but unless you explicitly say that you want them, they're not going to get added. Okay. So in this case, I'm not going to add any because I'm not interested in any of them. I'm only interested in doing proper filtering. And filtering is, again, anybody that's worked with tracing, you guys know how important filtering is, right? Because you never want to do, one of those unfiltered traces that just completely kills the server. Especially with something like weight events, like I said, I will run through the demo, just running something really trivial, like, one store procedure that runs for like 5-10 seconds. It generates thousands of weight events, right? So you never will want to run this without a filter. Let's do this. So session ID, I will give it a value, and once we get a value, we'll get rid of the warning, and that's it, and we can go back. Okay, so let's keep going here. Data storage. So here's where we pick the target that we want. I'm going to go over each target type right here. So the number one says ETW Classic Sync target. That is a binary target that works with the Windows ETW framework. That, to be honest, I've never actually used it yet. I have no need for the moment. So I'm just going to keep it out of the demo at this point. Second one is Event Counter, which basically will just create a structure in memory that just counts how many events you have, so nothing very exciting. But I mean, if you want the lightest possible trace, and you just care about how many things, how many events of that type we're having, well, then that's definitely the one you want to pick. The event file is the one that I'm going to be using for this demo, and the event file is just like the, let's say, the profile or target file, with the only difference is that it's going to be asynchronous, right? The histogram is a really cool one, and we're going to use it for our last demo. And the histogram target, basically what it does is that you give it an event, and then you give it a field in that event, and then it will actually count how many times of different values of a field, of that particular field, are happening throughout the trace. And that'll be really clear once we go to the last demo. And it's really cool what you can do there, because then you get like count and distribution of different things that are happening in a single event. The pair matching target will basically match two different pairs of events, and if they match, then they'll discard it, and we'll only keep in the trace the events that don't have a matching pair. This one is another really cool target, and the biggest use case that people use it for is to find, for example, processes that open a transaction but never close it, and you can use it. You can use the pair matching target to do something like this. And last but not least is the ring buffer target, and that is, it looks really much like the event file target, with the difference is that it doesn't flush it into a file. It just basically creates a ring buffer in memory, and it keeps running and just populating the ring buffer until it fills up, and that's it, right? So it's not for keeping the results, it's only for really light temporarily tracing. So okay, so in this case we're just going to go and use the event file. So it'll just,
Warner, there's one question.
yeah.
I can't wait till the end.
Yeah.
He asked, what was the predicate you chose?
Oh yeah, sure, we can go back. So we go here. You guys will see it's SQL Server dot session underscore ID equals 68, and the 68 we got it from my session. If you guys see, that's the SPID that I happen to get where I'm gonna run the procedure that I want to analyze. Okay. So let me go back here, and let's do the data storage. So very simple. I picked my target, and I'm gonna just, by default, it'll just give it the same file name as the name that I gave for the session. 1 gig maximum file. That's fine. We're not gonna even fill it up anyway. You can enable or disable file rollover, and how many files do you want. You can go here on the advanced, and here is where we can pick the different retention modes. By default, I always keep it on single event loss. I never do no event loss, even especially when I'm actually working on real systems. Definitely not recommended. So I leave the default here on the max latency as well, 30 seconds. I've never found that there's an issue, and I definitely can wait 30 seconds to just get my events dispatched. Here you might want to change this if you want to make it be able to decrease the amount of flushes. You might want to make a bigger memory buffer, but only if you're really tracking, like for example, events that collect a lot of text data or stuff like that. Otherwise, I don't set it. And I've never had to touch these memory partition settings at all, like per node or per CPU. Never touched them, so I wouldn't worry too much about them. So let's just script this out to a new query window, and I'll show you guys what it looks like. Okay, and let me make this bigger. Cool. So here we have the create event session, RTA analysis on server, add the event SQL OS wait info, where SQL Server session ID is 68, add event SQL OS wait info external, where SQL Server.session ID 68, add a target, set the file name to RTA analysis. Really easy to read, nothing exotic, nothing weird like the numbers or anything. So definitely really easy to just, you read it, you know what it's doing, that's it, right? So let's run this now. And if we can go in here, we'll verify our session is actually created. And it's right here. And then we'll just start it up. Then we'll go back to our 68, the SPID we want, and we'll run my tunable store procedure. So that'll run for a couple of seconds. And that's it. Okay, so now we can go back and just, I don't want to track it anymore. I'm going to stop it. And by default, the results are stored in the default log folder for SQL Server. So wherever your error log is, that's where you're going to be finding your analysis files for extended events. So right one, if we look at here, it's today, 2:37 p.m., so it's this one. And then it's really easy, just drag and drop to Management Studio. And that's it. No need to do anything fancy, just drag and drop, that's it. So if we go over here, we can see we tracked the wait events, we have durations, operational code, signal duration, and the wait type, and over. And we can see, all the different events. Just running that store procedure for about, 7 seconds, generated 3,776 events. So, quite a bit of data. Now, the cool thing here is that the GUI also gives us abilities to process the data, manipulate it, so we don't have to actually, import it into a table and start writing some SQL to get some really fast results and insights into what we're looking for. So, for example, here I'm going to add the wait type. I'm going to move it to the actual grid. So you guys see now I have the wait type in the grid, and once you have a value that is in the grid, you can group by it. So I can say, okay, well that's really nice. Let's see how many wait events are per wait type. So I can group, and you guys will see there were 2 wait types for my particular store procedure: SOS scheduler yield and write log. So SQL OS scheduler yield, it basically means that SQL Server, I consume all of my time at the CPU, and SQL Server said, hey, we can't let you, just have the CPU all for yourself. Get off the CPU for a sec, and then jump back in. And the other wait type is write log. And this one is probably you guys are all familiar with. It's simply, how much time do we wait when we put a log record to the log buffer, it gets written to the disk, and then we get our commit acknowledged, right? So interestingly, if you guys will see here, the grouping, what it does is that it will give us a count of how many of these we did, right? So we did almost 3,000 SOS scheduler yield waits, and we did 800 write logs. So on first glance, one would be thinking, well, I can certainly decrease the write log by having a faster transaction log or making less commits or committing less often in the application. But I would have to go in and try to optimize maybe the SQL code, or see how do I make it less CPU, use less CPU, so I can decrease this count. However, another cool thing we have here is that we can aggregate things. So if I go and aggregate by duration, I can set it to actually sum all the values in the duration field of the event. If I do that, then you guys will see the duration actually will show us that write log is the one that's actually taking most of the time, is not the SQL OS scheduler yield. So if this was an actual production case, what would be the recommendation? Well, just by decreasing the write log, we're going to get rid of, let's say it's an almost 8-to-1 ratio to the other wait type, and this is the easiest thing to do to optimize the store procedure. We just, do commits less often, or we could get faster transaction log. Let's imagine, it could be a way more complex profile here of weights, but you can always do the same analysis and just sort them one to the other, and you get them per session without all the other noise of all the other weights that are happening on SQL Server itself. And this, again, is something that you can only do with extended events. Very powerful stuff. Okay? Okay. So, moving on, I'm going to move on to my next demo. and it's going to be about error tracking in SQL Server. So I'm going to show you guys what we're trying to figure out here. So let me open real quick SQL. I'm going to be using SQL Query Stress. And what we're doing here is we're going to run a store procedure. And the store procedure says execute average daily hours for an employee ID for November 2013. Okay, so this store procedure basically just goes in, and I'm going to show you guys real quick what it does. Very, very simple. Average daily hours. Okay, so average daily hours will take an employee, and then it'll go and check out all the total days from the employee, and then it will just divide the total hours by the total days to give us an average of how many hours they worked per day. Really simple stuff, really straightforward. Okay, so let's go back to query stress. Sold here. And the way query stress works, it will actually do parameter substitution. So it will pick random employees from the employee table to replace this ID, this particular ID. So if I run this, I just run it. So very interesting. We did 1,000 iterations of calculating average daily hours, but we got 36 exceptions. Okay. So if we go up and open this, we'll find that 36 times we got an exception that we're dividing by 0. Okay? Very interesting. So let's assume this is a real production problem, and you're getting an exception somewhere in you know, code that it most likely will be way more complex than the example we're seeing here. How can you easily drill down specifically into what is throwing the error, and you can actually, you know, build a nice timeline that you can go back to the developers and be like, hey, this is what's going on, look at the errors we have in, you know, let's work on figuring out how to fix it. Okay, so let's work on that right now. So I'm going to create a new standard event session. Let me go here. We're going to call this the error tracker. We're going to start the event session immediately after session creation. And this time we do want to pick this one because we're going to do causality tracking. We want to know exactly the chain of events that led to the errors. Okay, so we know that it's a store procedure, so we're going to add the actual RPC start and completed calls. And then we also want to know not only the store procedure, but we want to know the exact statement inside the store procedure. So I'm going to add SP statement completed and SP statement starting. Okay, and finally the critical part of this whole thing, I'm going to add the error reported extended event. Okay, and then we're going to go into the configure just how we did before. What is the general filter I want in all of these? I want them to just be tracing what's going on my database. That will be the HR database. I've took a look before the session today. My SQL Server gave HR the database ID of 5. So number one predicate I'm going to add here is I want only database ID equals 5. Okay. And one more filter that we need, error reported. I want error reported only to track severity where it is bigger than or equal to 16. Okay, and the reason for that is when I was playing around to do this demo, I realized that SQL Server tracks tons of stuff as error reported events that are just informational. So the first time I ran this, I added error reported, I added all the events, and I said, okay, I just want the HR database, and I ran it, and I got tons of error reported, and I realized there's like, oh, error reported with severity 3, 4, 6, all these low severities that track tons of internal stuff in the engine that have nothing to do with errors, they're just informational. So very important there, add the filter to make it severity bigger or equals than 16. As we know, 16 is the actual severity that will halt execution. Okay, so and that's pretty much it. We can go back and we're gonna go into the data storage and we're gonna pick a different target. So event file, same thing, and this is the error tracker, and no need to touch any of the other stuff. And we can script it again and go over it really quick. You guys go see it's create event session error tracker, added all the events, it added the database ID filter to all the events that we selected, and on the error reported, it added the extra severity bigger than 16 event. Okay, so let's run this. That's done. I'm going to close it. I'm going to close this old one too. Can go back here, refresh. You guys will see we have the error tracker now. Let's start it. It's started now, and we'll just simply go back into SQL Query Stress and rerun this. Now, if you guys will see, very interesting. This time, because the employee IDs are picked randomly, see, we only generated 23 exceptions from SQL Query Stress. Last time we generated 36. So again, this is a type of trace that, for example, will help you, let's say, find stuff that's intermittent, that's not always that happens, and it will let you drill down and really quickly point to what the issue is. Okay, and that's it. So let's go and start doing our analysis. So let's stop this session. And let's go to the log event. You guys will see we have our error tracker right here. And I can open it with Management Studio just like I did before. Now, what do we want to do here? Very interesting. Look, RPC starting. Take a look at the bottom here. If you guys will see here, now we have attach activity ID GUID. And we have a GUID value here. This GUID value here is actually a fingerprint that uniquely identifies this particular request inside SQL Server. So, for example, anything that goes after this one, you can see that if they have the same GUID value at the beginning, then you know for sure that they were part of the same request, which is it's really cool. So let's start by what we're interested in. We want to see the error reported events, right? So let's find the error reported events first. So we can do a filter, really easy. And what we want is simply the name of the event. We just want to see error reported. Apply it. We go OK. You guys can see immediately we get the 23 events filtered, which is the 23 errors and exceptions that we got on SQL Query Stress. If I go on each one of these, make this bigger. So you guys can see here again, two very cool values, the GUID for the activity and the sequence for the activity, right? So let's take that first one as an example. So if I just select this, copy, I'm going to just copy and paste it here. Copy and paste, I go here. Now I want a different filter. Now I want to see exactly what led to this particular report. So what do? I want to go and find me all the ones that have this particular GUID. Apply, OK. Now what do we get here? We get, guys, look at the bottom here. You get, this is the same call, but you get it on, this is the number one call in this sequence. You get next one, it's the number 2 in the sequence, number 3, and then we get the error, and then it completes, and then the remote procedure call completes. And if we make this even bigger, we can see, for example, right here, if we zoom in, we can see the actual, SQL code that went in, and we can see employee ID 1139. And then we'll see, oh, there was SP statement starting. So what is that one? That is actually the initial call to the store procedure. Okay. Then there's another one. And then we know this is the one that throws the error right before the error reported. And again, let's assume this was code that is way more complex than it is now, but still, I think it really illustrates the point. Immediately we know, oh, okay, so this is where the issue is, right? Imagine if you had, nested store procedures or nested calls or views inside another view or stuff like that. you can actually drill down in the sequence and be like, okay, so what's immediately before the error reported? Boom, you get it right here. Okay, so this is the problem. So we're doing this division, and this division is the one that's returning the issue. Now, if this was a real-life case, then it's really easy. What do you do? Well, we now know that employee ID 1139 causes an issue when we do this division. So it means that employee ID 1139, well, does it have total hours tracked but 0 total days? So is it somebody is messing with the time? Is it we have a bug in our application, right? So you could actually just, you know, get all this information, send it to your developers. This is, you know, hard-proof evidence. Guys, this is the bug that we have, or this is the issue that we're having where, you know, we run 1,000 calls and 23 gave us a problem. Well, it's because, you know, we discovered these 23 IDs that have basically a data consistency issue, right? So really cool thing, causality tracking. It allows us to do this kind of analysis that was a lot harder to do before with just the regular profiler, and, you know, load it into a table, and then you have to fix the timestamps and all that kind of stuff, right? Very powerful stuff. Okay. And last but not least, the demo that I wanted to show you guys before we're done for today is the histogram. So what does it mean to use the histogram for extended events? So let's go over here. I'm going to make this bigger. Okay. And let me make this, drop this down here. Okay. So what does it look like? I'm going to go over each one and it'll be explained to you guys what we're going to do. So this session, if you guys go over here, is called I/O sizes, and it's only tracking one event, and it's going to be the file read completed. Okay? And it's going to have 2 filters. The database ID is 5, which I mentioned is the database ID of my HR database, and the file group ID is 1 because I just have the primary file group in this particular HR database. Now I wanted to create a histogram with it, okay? And what I wanted to be tracking for the histogram is the file read completed event, and the values, the different values that are going to be part of the histogram is going to be the size of that particular file read. So very, very cool. What does this session allow you to do? This session basically tells you the size and the amount of how many reads SQL Server has been doing. So for example, let's say, you know, your manager were to tell you tomorrow that we're gonna be buying new storage, and we need to figure out what type of SQL I/O tests we're going to do to make sure that our storage is actually working to the capacity that we want it to. Well, you would first have to figure out, like, you know, what's actually the I/O pattern that your SQL Server is using, right? So not easy to do this. In other ways, it's a lot harder to do and a lot more involved to do it through Windows, because, I mean, in this case, SQL Server itself will be tracking the file group. You could even go deeper and just track individual files if you wanted to, but in this demo, we're going to leave it this way. So very simple extended event session and very, very powerful results that will be way harder to get otherwise. So let's actually create this. Okay, now I'm going to drop the buffer cache so that we actually have to read data from disk. And finally, I'm just going to start the session. Okay. And just to generate some noise, let me close this. I'm going to open another SQL query stress that will basically force SQL Server to read all the tables. There's not a lot of data, so there won't be tons of reads anyway, but then it'll just read them all really quick. Okay, and that's it. And now that we're done, we can just actually read the values. So I'm just going to run this here. So we got 3 rows, and then we can just select it. So you can see in this case, I'm going to zoom in. There's 4 IOs that were done to read all of my data, and it was 2 IOs that were 56K one IO was 48K, and one IO was 64K. And that's it. Imagine, for example, if you guys were actually tracing a production system, most likely one of these IO sizes will be an outlier, will be used a lot more commonly than the other ones. So you could actually, go and take this data and let's say run a SQL IO test where you focus only on 56K IOs to make sure that that performs really well on the new storage. And to actually read the data, well, you just require a little bit of exploit here, nothing too crazy. You basically just have to get the target data by using the DMVs. The histogram stays in memory. And you just have to read here the slots of the target and then, how many there was and what value it was. So in this case, it's nothing too complicated. You basically just take the integer value, and the IO size is in bytes, so I divide it by 1054 to get it in kilobytes, and then the count is basically the count of how many times it happened during the trace, and that is the IO count right here. So very powerful stuff you can do with the histogram target as well. Okay, and we're close to our time now. So before we go, just want to leave you guys with some really quick takeaways. So number one, beware of excessive tracing. Like any tracing technology, you do not want to be tracing stuff that you don't need, especially on production servers. And now we have a lot more options, right? We have the retention, we have the synchronicity of the targets, we have specific filters, so there's really no excuse to do the old unfiltered trace and cause issues. Second of all, I want you guys to really think of this as a really practical tool for your toolbox. It's not intimidating. It's not hard to start playing with it. If you have a SQL 2012, it has the GUI, very easy to create stuff. And again, yeah, leverage the GUI for quick tracing. And the other thing is, please go on and check out some of the resources online. This was just a really quick practical introduction, but there's lots more info for a deep dive for anybody that's interested. Okay. Sharon, I don't know if any other questions?
Yeah, I have questions.
Okay.
Several people have asked if you'll provide your demo code so that it can be downloaded.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just send it to you and then you can post it.
Yep, I will do that.
Yeah, perfect.
What do you recommend for the forensic analysis of event data? Is there a repository that captures all the event data that you can query?
Well, in that case, what I recommend is two things. You could just create a ring buffer target so the data stays in memory, and then you would have to have a job maybe that moves it from the ring buffer to tables. The other option is if you do have Enterprise Edition, then you can do the SQL audit if you're just interested in auditing stuff. The other option you do have is that you, for example, the session health extended event session that comes by default on all these SQL servers. So you're already running it anyway. You can actually add more files to it, or you can make the files bigger. So that's really cool because you can actually modify how the session, the default session health, system health session works. So now that's something I do on my systems, by the way. I add more files to it and I make them bigger, so I have more session health information stored on the server by default. In case there's any issue, I can go back and read that session.
How do we eliminate idle events?
Well, you can use some of the filters. If there's events, for example, that that you not interested in, you can add, because we have the ability to now filter events on the actual event level. For example, on my initial RTA example, I could have made it a little bit more complex and added a filter where I don't want events that have a duration bigger than 0, which I didn't add, but I could have done that. So that's really the main way to do it is just to play with the filters and make sure that each event that you're using does have exactly every single filter you're interested in, so that you basically don't have to trace the events that you're not interested in. That's pretty much what I would do.
Can you build an extended event script with the 2012-2014 GUI and then script it and run it on 2008 R2. And
yes, you can. The only trick there is that you might be disappointed if you go back and the exact event that you are interested in did not exist back then. But for the most part, yes, you can just. The only thing though is if you connect Management Studio to a pre-2012 version, it won't give you the node that says extended events. It'll hide it. So the trick there is to connect to a 2012, go in, pick everything you're interested in, pick the script window, and then copy and paste that into your 2008. And yeah, it should work unless you're picking an event that didn't exist back then. But if the worst case, you'll run it, you'll get an error, and then you'll figure out what's going on. But for the most part, yeah, that's actually what I do nowadays when I want to trace a 2008 or 2008 R2. I just go in and create the script and copy paste to the other version.
And can the output log be processed back on 2012, 2014?
Yeah, you can just take that the extended event file, like the ones that I generated from a 2008 or 2008 R2, and again, that's something that I do, and just copy and paste it to a server or your laptop if you have Management Studio 2012, and it'll read the results and it'll give you the graphic interface to play around with them.
Can you show us some of the useful things that extended events tracks by default?
I could, but I think we're running out of time at this point.
Now,
so
maybe you'll have to do another presentation for us.
Yeah, exactly. Because actually, I do have a demo that goes into the session health and causes an out-of-thread situation, and then we go into the system health session and see how the forensics that we can do with it. But yeah, it's just a matter of time. So maybe if there's a part 2, I'll add it to it.
Let's finish up the questions. And then if people want to hang out and if you're willing, you can do that demo. Because we don't have to give up the spot.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I would need to prepare like the actual database and everything for that demo. So it wasn't on the menu for today.
He's going to give us, okay, just a comment, awesome demo and info. Question, I missed some of the beginning of the webinar because of the technical difficulties. I'm not seeing extended events in 2008 R2.
No, you won't see it. It's all internal. It won't be in the GUI anywhere. So it's all script based on that edition. You will need to create the script on Management Studio 2012 Plus. And it only shows up if you connect to a 2012 or more. So what you can do though is copy and paste the scripts that you generate from a 2012 to a previous version. But yes, you won't find the graphical stuff on anything below 2012.
Great demo, precise and to the point. Tyler's asking about the webinar download code. Are you talking about the demo scripts or the recording? They'll both be on SQLpath. The recording will be on SQLpath.org, dba.sqlpath.org on the meeting archives page, assuming I don't run into any trouble getting it up there. And another good comment, which I echo, a wonderful session. Awesome job. And Warner, I'm really grateful to you for doing this. I have one last bit of business I have to deal with, and that is to announce that our raffle winner is Jeffrey Langdon, J. Langdon at mathematica-mpr.com, and headquarters will be sending you your prize after I tell them that you are the winner. So thank you very much, Warner. I'm glad you were here to do this for us. And,
Yeah, thank you for the spot, Sharon. It's definitely always good to present for the DBA virtual chapter.
Well, I'm delighted to have you, and when you get ready to do more,
yeah, hopefully.
let me know.
Yeah, absolutely.
This year, but I've only got one filled out in January, and I have all of next year looming, so
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. We can arrange something, I'm sure.
I'm sure. We'll talk at Summit anyway. I'm sure we'll.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you all for coming. I'm going to stop the meeting. Warner's going to send me the scripts, and I'll put them on dba.sequelpass.org as well.
Thank you, guys. Have a good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, or wherever you are.
Ranga, dba.sequelpass.org. Probably tomorrow.